I moved to Willow Creek in late November, when the air smelled of wood smoke and cold metal, and the nights stretched long enough to swallow you whole. My house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac bordered by maples and decaying fences. Across the street stood the Halpern's place, a neat two-story home with green shutters and a wraparound porch that always looked like a Norman Rockwell painting. The first time I saw the blinking, it was the third night after I moved in. I'd been up late unpacking boxes and pretending to organize my new life. At 2:13 a.m. exactly, the house across the street flickered, once, twice, pause, then 3 times quickly. I remember looking up from my laptop and thinking it was a power surge. Then it happened again the next night. And the next. Always at the same time. Always in the same pattern. At first, I tried to ignore it. New town, new house, new start, the last thing I needed was to become the weird neighbor obsessed with blinking lights. But after a week, curiosity got the better of me. I set my phone alarm for 2:10 and sat by the window like some low-budget detective. Right on schedule, the lights came alive, a short pulse, a long one, 3 short, 2 long. I started counting the intervals. The precision made my stomach tighten. During the day, the Halpern seemed perfectly ordinary. Mr. Halpern, silver-haired and polite, spent mornings sweeping his porch or trimming hedges that didn't need trimming. Mrs. Halpern watered her potted plants in a floral robe, humming tunelessly. They waved every time I passed. There was something comforting about them, like the kind of couple who still sent Christmas cards. But at night, their house turned into a signal tower. The more I watched, the more deliberate it seemed. I timed the flashes using my phone stopwatch. 2 short. 1 long. Pause. Repeat. I jotted them down on a notepad, converting them into dots and dashes like I remembered from an old Morse chart. It wasn't random. It couldn't be. The lights were too disciplined, too human. On the 7th night, I noticed something new. The lights blinked as usual, but this time the upstairs window, the one I hadn't seen lit before, came alive with a faint orange glow, like a candle burning behind a curtain. I stood there frozen, pulse hammering. The room had been pitch dark every night until now. The next morning, I saw the Halperns outside. Mrs. Halpern smiled at me as she arranged flowers in a vase by the porch. Her eyes were kind, but distant, like someone smiling for a photograph. I wanted to ask if they'd been having electrical problems. But when I approached the property line, Mr. Halpern stepped out of the garage, still in his robe, holding pruning shears. His expression didn't change, but there was something cold in the stillness of it. I mumbled a greeting and backed off. That night, the lights didn't blink at all. I sat by the window waiting until 2:30, feeling oddly disappointed, maybe even guilty, as if I'd scared them into stopping. I almost turned in, but just as I did, the living room lights flared, rapid bursts, faster than before, so quick I could barely count. It felt frantic. Desperate. I recorded it on my phone. When I replayed the video frame by frame, the pattern emerged again. Not random. Purposeful. Almost like communication. I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about who they might be signaling, or if someone inside was trying to send a message out. The next day I looked up local electricians, trying to find a reasonable explanation. None of the reviews mentioned issues like that in our area. The power grid was stable. No outages. No surges. By the second week, obsession had replaced curiosity. I started cataloging the patterns every night. I even built a spreadsheet, time, duration, sequence. The intervals weren't changing much, but I noticed something chilling. Every night, there were exactly 13 blinks. No more, no less. 13 flashes. At 2:13 a.m. Coincidence, maybe. But the human brain isn't good at believing in coincidence once it finds rhythm. One evening, I decided to check from up close. Around 1:50 a.m., I put on a hoodie and crossed the street. The pavement glistened faintly under the streetlights. The Halpern's house was dark and still. I crept up the driveway, feeling both ridiculous and scared. Through the living room window, I saw nothing but furniture draped in soft moonlight. Then, from upstairs, a dim pulse, one light flickering through the curtain. I stepped closer. Another pulse. The pattern started again. 2 short. 1 long. 3 short. I held my breath. My phone timer read 2:13. When it stopped, the house went completely black. No sound. Not even the hum of electricity. I waited another minute, then leaned toward the glass, and saw my own reflection staring back. Except, for a fraction of a second, I could have sworn there was another figure standing just behind it. Something shifted inside me that night. The kind of shift you can't reverse once it happens, a door opening in your mind that refuses to shut. The next morning, everything looked perfectly normal again. Mr. Halpern waved from the porch, same as always. Mrs. Halpern smiled as she clipped dead roses. But now that smile felt heavier. Practiced. I told myself to stop watching. To mind my own business. To be the rational adult who doesn't stalk old neighbors over a flickering light. That lasted exactly one night. Because the following evening, the pattern changed. The blinks stretched longer, slower. I decoded it by hand, sweating as I traced each mark. When I finished, I sat back and stared at the page, the letters staring back at me in a crude translation of Morse code. SOS. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. SOS. The oldest distress signal in the world, spelled out through a suburban light fixture at 2:13 a.m. It was probably a coincidence, I told myself again. The brain sees patterns where it wants to. But it didn't feel random. The rhythm was too deliberate, too human. I'd heard Morse before. My grandfather was a Navy signalman, and when I was a kid, he used to tap messages on the table while teaching me to decode them. Someone will always try to talk to you in silence, he'd say. You just have to listen the right way. Now, decades later, in a town I barely knew, I was hearing silence that wanted to talk. I started treating it like a project. I recorded the lights for the next 5 nights in a row, setting my phone up on a tripod by the window. Then I loaded the footage onto my laptop, slowed it down, and logged the intervals between blinks. When I charted them, the pattern was exact. The same SOS repeated 13 times. Every night. I didn't know if it was a prank, a habit, or something darker. But I needed to see it closer again, in daylight, when my head wasn't filled with the pulse of panic. So that afternoon, I walked across the street. Mr. Halpern was in his yard, coiling a garden hose with the slow precision of someone who liked order more than rest. I called out, and he gave me a polite half-smile. Up close, his eyes were pale gray and distant, like he was always half listening to a voice that no one else could hear. I told him I was new to the neighborhood and asked if he had a ladder I could borrow. He nodded, told me to wait, and disappeared inside. The front door stayed open long enough for me to glance into their hallway, floral wallpaper, family portraits, a grandfather clock that ticked too loudly. When he returned, I thanked him and, maybe too casually, asked if they'd been having any electrical issues lately. For a second, he just looked at me. Then, with a voice that sounded like it had practiced being kind, he said, "Old houses have old wiring." And that was that. As he walked back to his porch, I noticed something. One of the upstairs windows, the one I'd seen flicker, had its frame painted shut. Thick brush stroke sealed the edges. No curtain movement, no airflow, nothing. When I got home, I zoomed in on one of my recordings. Through the glare, I could just make out the shape of that same window lighting up. The paint hadn't stopped the glow. Which meant the light source wasn't outside the window, it was behind it. That night, the signal came again. But not just SOS this time. Longer. More erratic. I could feel something different in it, the rhythm less mechanical, more emotional. I started decoding it line by line, letter by letter, and when I finished, the message made my skin crawl. Help me. Basement. I stared at the words until they blurred. There had to be an explanation, maybe a reflection, or interference from another house. I looked up the Halperns' address on Google Maps and checked the street layout. No other home lined up directly behind theirs. No other light source matched that angle. The next morning, I told my friend Jonah. He laughed, said I'd been inhaling too many paint fumes from unpacking, and that I was probably mixing insomnia with conspiracy YouTube. But I couldn't let it go. That evening, I took a walk and slowed down as I passed the Halperns' house. From up close, everything looked too perfect. The lawn trimmed into geometric shapes, the porch free of dust, the welcome mat perfectly centered. But something about the air there felt stale, like the house had been sealed from the inside. At dusk, I noticed movement in the upstairs window. A faint shadow passing by. Too tall and quick to be Mrs. Halpern. I tried to convince myself it was Mr. Halpern checking on something. Until I remembered the painted edges. By midnight, I was pacing the floor. I even considered calling the police, but what would I say? Hey, my elderly neighbors are possibly communicating in Morse code through their ceiling light? They'd hang up before I finished the sentence. Still, I couldn't just ignore it. So I did the next irrational thing that felt logical at the time. I walked over. The air outside was cold enough to sting. The street was empty, save for a cat slinking under a parked car. I approached their front steps and noticed a faint hum coming from inside, not electrical, not mechanical, something lower, rhythmic, like an engine idling beneath the floorboards. Through the window, the living room was dark. The hum grew stronger near the door, and I thought I could hear faint tapping under it. Like someone knocking from below. I stepped back, half terrified, half drawn in. My flashlight beam caught something near the doorframe, a line of scratches etched into the paint, small and irregular, as if someone had been clawing from the inside. The lights upstairs flickered once. Twice. 3 times. I froze. I wanted to leave, but some part of me, the part that couldn't stand unsolved puzzles, kept me rooted. The blinks came again, frantic now. The signal was the same phrase, over and over. Help me. Basement. Help me. Basement. Then, silence. I turned and walked home without looking back, the hum still vibrating in my ears. When I got inside, I replayed the footage again. Frame by frame. On the 10th blink, just before the sequence stopped, there was a faint outline visible behind the curtain, not a person, but something that moved like one. I couldn't sleep at all that night. Every creak of my house felt like footsteps. Every flash of passing headlights made me jump. At 6 a.m. sharp, I called the police. I told them what I'd seen. The officer sounded bored, but said he'd send a patrol car to check on the elderly couple. By noon, I saw the black and white pull up. The officers talked to Mr. Halpern, then went inside. 10 minutes later, they came back out. Smiling. Shaking hands. One of them waved at me across the street as if to say all good here. That night, at 2:13 a.m., the lights blinked again. But this time, the pattern was different, faster, uneven. Like someone panicking. And then, right before it stopped, the upstairs window flared bright one last time. When it went dark, I realized something chilling. The message had changed. It no longer said, help me. It said, he sees me. I didn't move for a long time after that. Just sat there in the dark, staring out my window at the Halpern silent house, trying to process what I'd just read. He sees me. The words wouldn't leave my head. They looped like a heartbeat, steady and suffocating. By morning, I'd convinced myself that maybe I'd made a mistake decoding it. Maybe I'd misread one interval or paused in the wrong place. But when I ran the footage again, frame by frame, the pattern was undeniable. Someone, or something, across the street was aware that I was watching. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus on anything. The blinking had stopped, but the house felt alive now. I could feel it even through my curtains. The air around it seemed heavier, charged. Every time I glanced out the window, the upstairs shade looked a little different, drawn tighter, a new crease in the fabric, like whoever was behind it was watching me now. That evening I took a walk just to burn the nervous energy. The town was peaceful, the kind of place where nothing bad ever happens, at least that's what everyone liked to say. But I'd learned enough about quiet towns to know that stillness can hide anything. When I passed the Halperns' driveway, I caught a smell I couldn't quite place, a mix of damp earth and burnt plastic, faint but distinct. The garage door was shut tight, but the smell was coming from beneath it. By 10 p.m., I'd made up my mind. I wasn't waiting for another night of signals. I was going to figure out what was going on, directly. At 2 a.m., I slipped out again. My flashlight beam shook in my hand as I crossed the street. The night was silent except for a dog barking somewhere in the distance. When I reached their porch, the hum I'd heard before was gone. Everything was still. I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. But as I turned to leave, I noticed a faint glint under the doormat, a spare key, old and rusted, the kind no one uses anymore but keeps, just in case. My heart was pounding hard enough to hurt. Rational Nate said go home. But curious Nate, the one who'd already gone too far, was louder. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell hit me first, a mix of bleach and something older, sour underneath. The living room was tidy, almost staged. Family photos lined the mantel. The Halperns smiling in their younger years, their daughter, a woman in her 20s with bright eyes and dark hair. Elise. The same woman from the pictures I'd glimpsed earlier. The clock on the wall read 2:11 a.m. I turned off my flashlight and waited. 2 minutes later, right on schedule, the ceiling light flickered. Then again. Then again. But it wasn't just the ceiling. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, faint reflections, as if the entire wiring system was responding to some internal rhythm. The pattern started. I recognized the cadence. Help me. Basement. But this time, the blinks were faster, almost panicked, repeating again and again. Basement. I found the door at the back of the kitchen, heavy, painted white, secured with a steel padlock. I tugged at it uselessly. Then, out of habit, I scanned the floor nearby. A vent cover. Small, metal, and barely hanging by one screw. I crouched and aimed my flashlight through it. At first, I saw nothing but concrete and shadows. Then, a movement. Quick. Subtle. An eye. It was only there for a second, wide, terrified, before pulling back into darkness. I fell backward, the flashlight clattering across the tile. My chest tightened so violently I couldn't breathe. Footsteps echoed upstairs. Slow. Deliberate. The light stopped blinking. The house went dead silent. I didn't move. The footsteps descended, steady and sure, until they reached the bottom stair. I could see the faint reflection of polished shoes on the hallway floor. A voice broke the silence, soft, almost gentle. You shouldn't be here. I didn't need to look to know it was Mr. Halpern. My body reacted before my brain did. I bolted for the door, tripping over the threshold and sprinting across the lawn. I didn't look back until I was inside my own house with every lock fastened. From my window, their house looked exactly the same as before. Peaceful. Quiet. The kind of place no one would ever suspect. I stayed awake until sunrise. By morning, there was a patrol car parked outside their home again. I hadn't called this time, someone else must have. I watched the officers go in and out, calm and methodical. They left after 20 minutes. No arrests. No questions. No flashing lights. I wanted to scream at them to check the basement, but I couldn't even bring myself to open my front door. At noon, I saw Mr. Halpern trimming his hedge again, humming. The same precision, the same calm. When he glanced my way, he smiled faintly and gave a polite nod, as if the previous night hadn't happened. I forced myself to nod back. That night, I turned off every light in my house and sat in the dark, staring at his. The clock hit 2:13. Nothing. No blinks. No movement. No hum. I waited another hour, then gave up. I told myself maybe it was over. Maybe whoever had been sending the message, real or imagined, had finally given up too. At 4:07 a.m., I was half asleep on the couch when a faint noise jolted me awake. Not blinking. Tapping. I followed the sound to the far wall of my living room, the one that faced their house. 3 taps, pause, 3 more, longer pause. My blood ran cold. I picked up my phone, switched to the Morse app I'd installed days ago, and let it listen. After a few seconds, it translated the pattern automatically. Help me. Please. Basement. The signal wasn't coming from across the street this time. It was coming from inside my wall. I stumbled back, the phone trembling in my hand. There was no logical explanation, no shared piping, no old vents. Just drywall and insulation. The tapping came again, softer now. Then it stopped. When dawn finally broke, I went outside just to breathe real air. That's when I saw it, a faint, dark smear under the siding of my house. Rust-colored. Like something had seeped through from the other side. I didn't call anyone that morning. I didn't go outside again either. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the faint reddish stain below my window frame, pretending that ignoring it would make it stop existing. By afternoon, exhaustion finally won. I fell asleep on the couch with the daylight spilling across the floor. When I woke, the sun had gone down, and for a brief, merciful second, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the time glowing on my phone, 2:07 a.m. I didn't move. 6 minutes until the hour. The house across the street was dark. No movement, no flicker. At 2:13, nothing happened. And yet the quiet felt heavier than any noise. The kind of silence that listens back. I stayed there until the clock hit 2:40, convincing myself that maybe the nightmare had ended, until the flashing started again. But this time, it wasn't the Halperns' house. It was mine. The kitchen light flickered once, then twice, in the same rhythmic pattern. The exact same cadence I'd spent weeks decoding. Short. Long short. Pause. Long short. I stumbled toward the switch, but before I reached it, the light stopped. My heart was hammering. I checked the breaker, nothing tripped. No surge. Then the noise began, that low, mechanical hum, vibrating through the floorboards. I turned off every light and opened the curtain. The Halperns' house was lit again, but not like before. Every single window blazed, bright and harsh, like a stage set in the middle of the night. Mr. Halpern stood on the porch. Perfectly still. Watching my house. My phone vibrated suddenly, a notification from the motion sensor camera I'd set up by the window. I opened the live feed. It showed a single frame from 20 minutes earlier, a shape crossing my yard. Not a person, smaller, bent, half-crawling. The outline was wrong, distorted, as if whoever it was had been dragging themselves forward. I dropped the phone. When I looked up again, the Halperns' lights were gone. Total darkness. That was when I heard it, faint, muffled, from somewhere beneath me. Tapping. Basement. But my house didn't have a basement. Or at least, that's what I thought when I bought it. The real estate agent had said the foundation was sealed decades ago, crawl space only, no access. But the tapping came again, unmistakable now, followed by a low creak like old hinges. I followed the sound through the kitchen, to the pantry door. The tapping stopped. Then, a single long scrape, like something being dragged. The floor vent at the base of the pantry was slightly ajar. I got down on my knees and shone my flashlight through the slats. A tunnel. Narrow, carved through concrete and dirt. And deep in the dark, a flicker of light. It was pulsing. Slow. Steady. I reached in and pried the vent loose. The air that came out was colder than it should have been, damp, metallic, with a faint sweetness that made me gag. The tunnel wasn't wide enough to stand in, but curiosity had long since devoured fear. I crawled in. The light came from a single bulb strung along an extension cord that vanished into the earth. The tunnel sloped downward, maybe 20 feet, until it opened into a small cement room. Basement. In the corner sat a stack of dusty VHS tapes, a few old CRT monitors, and a control box wired directly into a tangle of lights identical to the ones in the Halperns' house. The monitors flickered on one by one as I entered. And on the screens, static shifted into images. A woman, bound, terrified, staring directly into the camera. Her eyes wide, her lips forming silent words. "Help me." I stumbled back, heart hammering so hard it hurt. It was her, Elise Halpern, the daughter from the photos. But she looked exactly the same age as in those pictures. Not a day older. A mechanical voice crackled through a nearby speaker. Faint, hollow, male. "She used to signal from here." I turned. Mr. Halpern stood at the entrance of the tunnel, the flashlight in his hand throwing long shadows across the cement. His face looked carved out of something old, calm, expressionless, but his eyes had the glassy sheen of someone who'd stopped seeing the world a long time ago. "She wanted someone to see her," he said softly. "I made sure she could." He stepped closer, the beam flickering across the screens. Elise's image looped again, the same frantic signal, the same terrified eyes. "You killed her," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I'd actually said it aloud or just thought it. Mr. Halpern didn't react. He looked at the monitors like they were holy relics. "She was sick," he murmured. "She wouldn't stop screaming. So I made it quiet." He turned a knob on the control panel. The lights on the screen began to blink in rhythm again. "She calls every night," he said. I let her speak. The tunnel seemed to shrink around me. I could hear my pulse roaring in my ears. Then, behind him, something shifted, a small sound, like fabric moving. Mrs. Halpern. Standing at the top of the tunnel. Her face was pale, slack, her eyes unfocused. For a second I thought she was going to speak, but she just stared, then clutched her chest, collapsing soundlessly to the ground. Mr. Halpern turned too late. He let out a single, broken sound, half word, half sob, and dropped beside her. The monitors flickered violently. The blinking sped up, faster, frantic, blinding. Then, total blackness. I crawled out of that tunnel like a man escaping his own grave. By the time I reached the surface, an ambulance's siren was wailing down the street. Someone must have called it, maybe one of the neighbors, finally noticing the noise. They took Mrs. Halpern away on a stretcher. Mr. Halpern didn't move from the porch. He just sat there, staring into the distance as the paramedics worked. When the officers finally entered the house, I saw the basement door wide open for the first time. Inside, rows of monitors glowed faintly through the dust. Later that morning, I learned the truth. The Halpern's daughter, Elise, had gone missing 20 years ago. Officially, it was listed as an abduction. Unsolved. But inside their basement, the police found her recorded messages, videos she'd made as a teenager, part of a series of communication experiments she and her father had conducted with light codes. Something had gone wrong one night, an accident, or worse, and Mr. Halpern had spent the next 2 decades replaying her signals through the house lights, night after night, at the exact time she'd sent her last one. 2:13 a.m. SOS. Help me. Basement. The sequence hadn't been a message to anyone. It had been a recording of her last moments, looping endlessly. And somehow, in fixing the wiring that connected our houses years later, those signals had bled into mine. The day they took the equipment away, the neighborhood felt hollow. The hum was gone. The nights, quiet again. But last night, for the first time in weeks, I woke up at 2:13 a.m. Not to lights. Not to tapping. To silence so deep it sounded like breathing. And just before I closed my eyes again, I saw it, a faint pulse of light across my wall. One flash. Pause. One long. The beginning of a message.